Okay, welcome everyone. This is our second day of Diversity and Allyship Week. I am Şenay Ağca, Chief Diversity Officer of the School of Business. And we have an amazing event today. Thank you for joining again. Our panel is on neurodiversity, empowering differences in education, leadership, and beyond. We have great experts in our panel. Dr. Nakamura from GSHED at GW, Sean Hoffman, partner at KPMG, and Scott Gibson, Chief Operating Officer at Melwood. And our moderator is our student, Global MBA and Master in Business Analytics student, Miranda, Montenegro. I will give the word to Miranda. We will start with the introductions and move to panel. And at the end, we will have some time for Q&A. Looking forward to hearing from our panelists and your contributions as the questions. Miranda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Şenay. Hi, everyone. As Dr. Şenay mentioned, my name is Miranda, and I am a second-year GMBA MSBA student at GW. To give everyone a little bit of background on me, I am originally from El Salvador, and after I graduate, I'll be joining Barclays in investment banking. As somebody who's going to be part of a big corporation, I'm committed to being an ally for diversity, and that's why today's discussion on neurodiversity is so important to me. I'd also like to thank Dr. Nakamura, Scott, and Sean for joining us. And I think before we start questions, this might be a great moment to hear a little bit about each of our panelists. So why don't we start with Dr. Nakamura?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Yoshie Nakamura. I am housed in Graduate School of Education and Human Development, and I have been studying the leadership, and it's with the focus of the neurodiversity. And I'm very excited to be here today.
Perfect. Thank you. Why don't we go on to you, Scott?
Thanks, Miranda. Hi, I'm Scott Gibson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Melwood. Melwood is a family of nonprofits that for more than 60 years has been advocating for and empowering people with disabilities and neurodivergence through expanding opportunities to work and thrive in their community. We do this in a number of ways, including workforce development training, where we're preparing individuals for work and also preparing employers to be more accessible, through community-based supports for living, and through operating a social enterprise, which is very often the first employer of individuals we serve.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, Scott. Let's go on to you, Sean.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Hoffman. I'm a partner with KPMG, and I wear a couple of hats within our firm. I am the partner in charge of risk management for our advisory practice. So advisory, kind of another word for consulting. And the other hat that I wear is probably the reason that you've all asked me to participate today is I lead our firm's neurodiversity efforts. And so as a part of that, my focus is trying to figure out how do we as a firm help neurodivergent individuals get here, succeed here, and lead here. A little personal background about me. I am married with two children. My son, who's our oldest, is on the autism spectrum, and that's kind of how I got involved in being focused on neurodiversity. Thanks.
Thank you. I really like that part about getting there, staying there, and leading there. And for any late joiners, I just want to make sure if anyone has any questions, feel free to send them in the chat. We will be reviewing them at the end in the Q&A section. So why don't we dive into the questions we've prepared? The first question is going to be for Dr. Nakamura. Dr. Nakamura, can you please tell us what neurodiversity is and how does it encompass different ways of thinking, learning, and interacting in the world?
Thank you. Sorry, just something pops up on my screen, so I just closed it. Thank you so much, Miranda. Such a great question. The term neurodiversity refers to the really natural variation in the human brain function. Right? So it used to be, it's more of the disability terms are coming from medical, legal areas, and that kind of specify like ableism condition, like able, disabled. So that makes it two different the groups. But the neurodiversity is really about the variation. It's a spectrum. And people are good at something else, and other people good at something else, right? And it could be somewhere in between, or something more of the stronger in some areas, right? And this neurodiversity term is the late 1990s, that coined by the sociologist, the Judy Singer, and it becomes so popular because of this is how that our society sees that variation diversity should be, right? It's not coming just from the medical term, that labeling the people in the different ways, right? So then that in terms of the neurodiversity condition is the more the medical terms of there's a diagnosis of, for example, ADHD, dyslexia, ASD, and etc. Right, and there are many good strengths, and that, for example, for the creativity, innovation, the dyslexia, that individuals can exhibit, and or something about spatial recognition and pattern recognition of the other ASD, individuals also exhibit it too. So these are really like a good strengths that people exhibit in the world, like something like innovation happens, like the new models developed in a company, etc. So these are how that we see the great strengths that actually we see how successful people are. And that's, I just wanted to get into more when we talk about the strategies and successful strategies for the leaders.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Nakamura. That was super insightful. Sean or Scott, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only thing I would add is, when I think about neurodiversity, I'll take my dad hat off for a moment, and I'll put my partner hat on. So, what does it mean to me as a kind of an owner of a firm? And, I, as a partner, have a responsibility to bring to my clients innovative, unique ways of approaching problems. And when I think about Dr. Nakamura, how you just described a neurodivergent individual, man, that really resonated with me. I start to think about the unique talents that a neurodivergent individual brings. They ingest information differently, they process information differently, and they present or convey information differently. And then I mirror that up to what is it that I'm trying to do for my clients? Well, it's just that, right? Like, how can I bring to my clients novel, unique perspectives? And so for me, there's a business imperative really to thinking about how do I attract and retain, like when I started getting here, succeeding here, leading here, how do I do that with neurodivergent individuals? Because their perspectives, their talents are something that I believe my clients would value and appreciate. So I guess I was intrigued as I heard your definition. It wasn't new. I've heard that, but it just kind of reinforces for me why I and my firm are so interested in neurodiversity within our firm.
I think I would. Oh, go ahead, Dr. Nakamura.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Justin. Because I also in my research, for example, and people. I studied neurodiverse leaders who are very successful in different organizations across industries. And they are so open, really open to other people, like others. Meaning, so they don't stereotype each individual. It's more like open, and more curious about what other people are good at or challenge or suffer, right? And so they are more open to accepting and also relating, trying to relate. So that's the biggest strength of the successful neurodiverse leaders can demonstrate. And as a result, other people are more comfortable with them. And some are advocating, some are creating the network, the great community, informally or even formally. So these are the things that I noticed that in my leadership research, and I would love to hear how in a practice in organization that you see as well. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
No, I think the only thing I want to add to the conversation is to reinforce the notion that all of us contribute to neurodiversity. So sometimes I have heard people use neurodiverse as a polite way of trying to say autistic or neurodivergent. But neurodiversity is the entire spectrum. So it includes folks who are neurotypical, if there is a true pure neurotypical. The way I tend to think about it or visualize it in my mind is to think about a bell curve distribution. And if you assume that the x-axis or the horizontal axis is the spectrum of how you receive or process information, and the y-axis is the number of people it applies to, there is some kind of forming around a norm, if you will, in the mathematical sense. And neurodiversity exists in degrees. So we all process information a little bit differently. None of us process information exactly the same. There's just a lot of commonality for a group of us that's very easy to accommodate in our way of thinking and our systems and our processes. As you move further away, a standard deviation or two away, if you will, that's where you're seeing more divergence from that norm. And that's where we have to be more thoughtful about accommodation. And I think that's important because that's where the whole conversation of, like, is this a disability comes into play.
Which honestly is a really great segue, Scott, because the next question is for you. And it is sort of in regards to that part of it is, should neurodiversity be considered a disability? What are the advantages or disadvantages of framing it as such, both legally and socially?
So I would argue that neurodiversity, because it includes all of us, is not something we should be talking about in terms of disability. It's really neurodivergence, which is when you're deviating away from that so-called norm, if you will. Historically, and I think Dr. Nakamura probably touched on this because we always thought about this in terms of medical condition, I think the answer would have been very yes. We would have said absolutely, this is a disability. Where it got harder is that words have context and meaning. And I think we have seen a real struggle in our society with people applying negative implications to the term disability. And we've seen society respond to this in a number of ways. In the 90s, person-first language became a really common trend. Put the person before disability, people with disabilities. We have seen some moving away from that. We have seen people wanting to say, no, the disability is part of who I am, a desire to see identity-first language come back from the disabled community. It is particularly strong in the autistic community and the deaf community who see their condition as part of who they are, not something that can be separate. I think we see a lot of positive with this mindset shift to the neurodiversity paradigm, where we're looking at it as part of a continuum of variation, and we're taking a strengths-based approach. So instead of saying somebody is obsessive, we would say somebody can hyper-focus, right? And looking at how can we take these characteristics that we're othering, I think was the term Dr. Nakamura used, when we were looking at it from a traditional medical sense and figuring out how somebody deviated from the norm and putting in a strengths-based perspective. So I wouldn't want us to walk away from that. That said, the reality is if somebody has a formally diagnosed form of neurodivergence, they do qualify for the rights under disability laws. So it's a personal choice. I think there are definitely benefits that while I would never want to walk away from the strengths of identity first language, of recognizing the whole neurodiversity paradigm, of taking a strengths-based approach, I would want somebody to know that there is some practical implication to whether or not they treat their neurodivergence as a disability. The biggest is their right to accommodation. That doesn't happen just because there's variation. That happens because we have a recognized disability. I understand that I think a lot of times the hesitation is on negative connotations that are attached to disability, and we have to overcome that as a society. But I think it's really important for people to understand formally diagnosed neurodivergence likely qualifies them for protections under disability law.
Thank you, Scott. That's really helpful. I don't know if Dr. Nakamura or Sean, if you want to add something. I think Sean, because you unmuted. Oh. Perfect. If there isn't any comments to add to that, we're going to move on to our third question, and this one is for Sean, and it is a three-parter. So the first part of the question is, what are some effective strategies for both employees and employers during the hiring process to support neurodivergent candidates? The second part is, are there any anecdotes or real-life examples that illustrate what works well? And the last part of the question would be, when and how should neurodivergent individuals disclose their condition during the transition from education to the workplace?
Great. Okay, well, I will endeavor to answer all three parts, but if I accidentally miss one, please call me out and remind me.
Okay, you got it.
I'll go back to, what is it that we're trying to do through the recruiting process? And that's to make sure that we get to know candidates, understand their strengths, and map those strengths to our job needs, our open positions. And so in doing that, what we're trying to do is identify a way that we're able to do that the best we can, get to know that candidate as well as we can and really understand them. And so when it comes to neurodivergence, and Scott, I really love the way you kind of characterized it in a bell curve. We, over time, I think we, not just our firm, but industry, have created techniques for recruiting and onboarding individuals that kind of center on what I'd say neurotypical or Scott, that norm, the middle. And that's usually something like a one-on-one type of interview. And what we're learning with the neurodivergent community is that method doesn't always work so well. And I'm probably painting with an overly broad brush. But what we need to think about are there alternatives? So I think about today, we have our one-on-one interviews, but even in just getting to know candidates, we have events that probably many students have attended, career fairs, or meet the firms nights, where we come in. And look, my experience with them is that they're chaos, right? Like you come in, there's people at all these different tables, it's noisy, it's loud. And so that doesn't work well for all people. And so what we are doing is thinking about adapting those events to different venues, different forums. So can we create some smaller events that might be less noisy, less full of distractions, allowing us to get to know the candidates more effectively, all right? And then as an alternative to our one-on-one interview, and I think this is getting into your second part, can I give some anecdotes? So we have now started using, in lieu of a more traditional one-on-one interview, a simulated project where we bring in neurodivergent candidates, pair them up with our folks, and we work on a simulated project. And it's a really good way for us to be able to get to know the candidate, and in turn, for the candidate to get to know us, right? Because when you think about it, these interviews or these simulated projects, it's all really just a big matching process. So a way for us, it's almost like speed dating, I suppose, right? It's a way for us to get to know and figure out, are we a good match? And so we found a lot of success through these simulated projects. And interestingly, what we're learning too is that these simulated projects, they might actually have some utility for the neurotypical, right? So I hear a lot about this concept of universal design, that sometimes we develop something thinking that it might be, an accommodation, when in fact it's actually a very effective method or technique for everyone or for many people. And so that's kind of an anecdote, like where we have run people through these types of simulated projects. We get to know them in a very different way than we otherwise might have. In terms of your last question, when is the right time, or is there a right time to disclose? Look, I think that goes back to really a personal decision, right? Like what are individuals comfortable with? I will say that our firm and other firms have avenues to help you enter a firm that become available to you, or at least known to you via your disclosure, right? So when I think about this alternative to our one-on-one interview, like we will apply that as we can, the simulated project. but generally only when someone is let us know that they're neurodivergent. Otherwise, we haven't made that part of our standard practice, right? And so that becomes available to folks that if they hadn't let us know, we wouldn't have known otherwise to employ this other technique. And then that kind of goes throughout. So even once you're in the firm, right there, maybe that's when you decide now is a right time or a good time for you to disclose. Well, then there are other things that we have available at our firm for you to be able to take advantage of. And again, that becomes known and available to you, as you disclose. So, there's again, I guess it just comes down to kind of a personal choice, but I think that's the upside that people should keep in mind is that when you disclose, you will find that there are avenues that you could take advantage of that you might not otherwise have. Did I get all three?
Yes, you did. You did great.
Yay for me.
And I really like the idea of like the speed dating. I think especially like as a student, from my perspective, those simulated projects also give, the neurodivergent candidate or any candidate a good idea of what it would be like to work there. So there's definitely benefits on both sides. Dr. Nakamura, Scott, is there anything you'd like to add to the specific three-part question?
I really would love to build on Sean's response, in part because I think there is some public discussion right now that might give the perception that these alternative paths that Sean is talking about are a watering down of standards. And I want to be very clear that they're not, and talk about why they are relevant and how actually I think they do a better job perhaps of assessing merit for the job or good match for the job than traditional hiring methods, particularly at the entry level. So our entry-level hiring process, and when I say our, I'm not talking about Melwood's, I'm talking about collectively throughout the workforce. The entry-level hiring process is overwhelmingly built on social rapport and building a connection. There has for a long time been the phrase, hire for attitude, train for skill. It is born out of practicality. The reality is there are more people applying for the job than we can possibly seat in the jobs. Experience is thin. If you're fresh out of college, you have some internships, but your resume probably fits on one side of a sheet of paper. So you need this high volume, high churn recruiting process where you implement paper cuts during the applicant tracking system review. In fact, that might even be automated these days, where it's finding the 10% of resumes that are the best match. And then you go through and you have a drop. Well, if you're hiring based on social rapport, I just want to set up the disconnect here. One of the primary diagnosis criteria for autism is pervasive challenge with social interaction. It may exhibit in ways that we apply meanings to that aren't intentional. So lack of eye contact. We tend to, as a society, perceive lack of eye contact as evasiveness, as not being forthcoming. Well, it could just be a symptom of the person's neurodivergence. So calling that out and accommodating that, building a process that respects that, allows you to see the person's true merit. Sean brought up the job fairs. Hypersensitivity can be something that occurs with neurodivergence. So, for me, I'm with Sean. I think the job fair setting is chaotic. Like, I think it's loud and it's noisy. But imagine if you're hypersensitive. I'm not hypersensitive, Ollie. I just find it annoying. If you're hypersensitive, it's a different degree of disruption. You might be hearing really clearly 6 conversations going on at once. I'll share an anecdote of an individual that we served in one of our programs at Bill IT, which trains young adults with disabilities to enter careers in tech. She was audio hypersensitive. Every 30 minutes, she would wince in pain. What we did not know was she was hearing a high-pitched whistle noise that our thermostat made every time our heat engaged. We couldn't even hear it. We couldn't perceive that audio range, and she was getting an ear-piercing whistle. Can you imagine trying to put your best foot forward while you're hearing all of this audio background at that level? So I just want to be clear because of recent public conversation. These alternative paths are all about making sure there is a good merit-based screening process for these jobs. In fact, I imagine if Sean were to talk to his hiring folks and I were to talk to ours, We would argue that the simulation assessments are actually better at screening entry-level talent than the traditional interview. They're just more time intensive, and so it's hard to devote the resources to doing it. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Your next question actually talks a little bit about what we can do to make the workplace inclusive. So can you give us a little bit about how can employers create an inclusive workplace environment that enables neurodivergent employees to thrive? And what strategies can the neurodivergent individuals adopt to maximize their potential and navigate workplace challenges?
Yep. So I won't repeat the things that Sean and I kind of hashed out in the discussion of recruitment, but I'll start by saying this. There is no silver bullet that solves all situations. You got to start by neurodiversity as a full continuum of how we process information. Disability is a full continuum of different conditions. There is no one single solution. The one universally sound piece of advice is if you want to set employees up to succeed, whether they're neurodivergent, they have another disability, or actually, if they're just a member of your workforce in general, you have to create a culture of psychological safety. You have to build a workplace where employees feel comfortable being who they are and advocating for what they need to succeed. Like, we all want our employees to be the most productive they can be, to be the most successful they can be, either because we're good coaching leaders or because we're good capitalists that just want really productive organizations. There are lots of motivations for it, but if you create a culture of psychological safety where an employee can say, here's who I am, here's what I need to succeed, here's what is a barrier for me to success. Sometimes you're going to be able to meet those needs. Sometimes you're not. Sometimes maybe you can meet them halfway, but you will have made a huge difference just by creating an environment where they are comfortable bringing those needs to work. One of the things that happens very often with neurodivergent individuals, particularly female neurodivergent individuals, is they're very good at what's called masking. You know, I can act the way I think others want me to act. So if I need to fidget, I can control it and not fidget if I think that's unacceptable in the space I'm in. That takes a lot of mental energy. If you talk to a neurodivergent individual who is good at masking, they will tell you it's exhausting. Think about what happens for the workplace, not just for them personally, but also for the organization that's employing them, if they don't have to devote that energy to masking because they feel comfortable being who they are, right? Burnout's going to be lower. They're going to feel better. They're probably going to be more productive. They're probably going to be more loyal to their employer who is accepting them for who they are. So build a culture of psychological safety is probably my number one piece of advice for any employer.
I think that's super important. Oh, sorry.
Oh, the companion to that for the individual, because you asked about both the employer and the individual, is self-advocate. You know, once that culture is there, you have to speak up. And it gets back to the when do you disclose? That's really a personal question, but advocating for what you need is the most likely thing to set you up for success.
I agree. And I did want to ask, you mentioned the psychological safety. Has there anything you've seen maybe like in your personal experience that has helped create that environment?
I think it is making sure that you are consistent with this culture, top down, side to side, bottom up. Like, everything has to reinforce it. There are lots of organizations that are good at saying things. They'll put out suggestion boxes, but they don't have follow through. They don't. I'll tell you, somebody that I think gets it right is the CEO of GDIT. They have had a campaign, How Are You Really? Where, you know, she has been pushing people to get beyond the like superficial how are you in the hallway. You know, how often do we say how are you and we keep walking? Like, hey, how are you doing? And we don't even pause. Like, we just keep walking. She has really been encouraging people to be open and honest about how they're doing. And that's remarkable, especially given that she's in the defense contracting space where there's a lot of sensitivity to people being vulnerable and talking about stress. And so I think the key to it working is top down, bottom up, side to side, really showing you mean it. And it's more than just a process on paper, or here's the inbox you send your request to. Prioritizing the way leaders treat this in their evaluations, those types of things.
Perfect. Thank you. These are great examples. Dr. Nakamura or Sean, is there anything you'd like to add to a specific question?
Yeah, it's just so many thoughts come to my mind as I listen to Scott's talk. The one thing that I wanted to build on is the peer network. Is the one ways to build psychological safety, or because the many individuals that I studied or I interviewed mentioned that they find the people who have the similar conditions or challenges, or the people who it could be like within the same department or within the same organization or outside organization, right? To either those who are going through the similar challenges, or they find someone who understands and wanted to support. So that actually helps them feel being comfortable and seek how they can approach the things that they need to do, or voice their opinions, or more self-advocacy, that's as Scott mentioned. Because otherwise it's really felt lonely process, and that gives them more stress and pressure. But those who find, and the successful leaders that I have been interviewing are the ones who have the peer networks. It could be social media, because nowadays they can find so many things, right? And then I go to social media and find so many things, right? And then I can associate with the challenges that I have. So that's one piece. And also for the self-advocacy piece, once the person who finds is someone who understands and support, and it could be direct supervisor, or it could be someone in a different department. And then slowly but gradually expansion of the network, of the support network. So that's the great driver to really pushing to the change in the culture. It won't happen overnight, but it definitely helps, because then people start talking about same language, understanding, and mutual respect. So in a way that it not only educating self to how to self-advocate, but also educating others. Some doing it, actually taking an initiative in a task force or some sort of diverse initiatives and the formal role taking on, or others doing it very informally. And also once they are in a more getting into the comfort zone, or maybe a psychosocial safety, like Miranda, you asked, then if they can open up, and so then surprisingly others open up. And wow, I didn't know that. And almost everybody in my department thought about it before, or similar challenges, or maybe completely different challenges, but we understand each other. And then now we think about how we can tackle this project together, playing everybody's strengths. Maybe like changing even like a workplace as a like very dim light, because many people are sensitive, and why we keep that lights on all the time, that almost everyone feel that uncomfortable that way, because no one voiced it, others felt the same way. Or how to organize the calendar or things to do, right? And then share the best practices, and actually that helping to build more psychological safety and to be successful.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Nakamura. And don't even get me started on the lights. I agree completely. Sean, is there something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is if you think about how do we make this become real, we've got to make these activities that we're doing part of the fabric of our firm, as opposed to some standalone kind of off to the side program. And so I was intrigued by Scott what you said, that this notion of how are you doing really, right? Like so often we have kind of these cursory type of conversations programs that we put out there that are designed to kind of make us feel good, but they're not really part of what we're doing. And so oftentimes you'll see programs that are set up that are off to the side. And because they're not built as part of the fabric of the firm, it's easy to discard them or not have them become part of your daily routine. And so as I think about all of the different programs, and I'll talk about some more of them in a moment, but I do think it's important that it goes beyond just a kind of a program of the day or something, that we are really authentic and mean to intentionally build these into how we operate and not make them just something off to the side. I'm not sure if that made sense. It made perfect sense in my head, but I'm not sure how it landed for everyone.
No, it definitely does. I think that when things are just like a separate program, it's not really taken as serious as if it's a ingrained part of the culture or like an ingrained part of like your day-to-day processes. So I completely agree. And I know we'll get a little bit more time in the last question, Sean, to sort of talk about some of these. For now, I'm going to sort of switch from talking about a workplace environment and more of a culture perspective to talking about like some actionable strategies that might support neurodivergent individuals in pursuing leadership roles. This question is for you, Dr. Nakamura. So can you talk about some of what actionable strategies might be taken for these individuals pursuing leadership roles and how they can leverage their unique strengths to become effective and successful leaders?
Thank you, Miranda. In addition to what I said earlier in terms of defining a peer network and also the creating a network, by themselves, so they can initiate that. It's not just trying to find that network that exists somewhere. Actually, each one of us has a power to create the network, initiate that, right? The building the community, right? And a community of practice, meaning that they can start actually engaging in how they can do better, right? And overcome if there's any challenges. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that I find it very interesting in the study is that many individuals find out that more increased self-awareness and what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are due to the COVID. So used to be, so I asked, so how did you, how started to think that you need to really understand more about strengths and weakness, and if that any like a medical diagnosis that they take, or and they said because of the COVID changed this drastically the structures of each one of our lives, right? So everything like a virtual and just so much issue and tension, and it's what happened, and that happens to all of us, right? Worldwide. But then it started to think, okay, so maybe I need to understand better about myself. Is there anything that I need? So some are going to a therapist, maybe virtually, but then a therapist also suggested that maybe like you might want to take a diagnosis or then see how the things. And with that assessment, maybe strengths based, if the Scott might say, they have the better understanding. Oh, okay. That's why I have these strengths and I have these things that I need to pay attention to more. And then I have them better understand. So these are things that if all of us, if we don't know what our strengths are and what our sort of, the things that we need to more pay attention to improve, then there's no strategy that they can build, something that continuously the struggle, right? And it continues. But then if they know what we need to do, right? If we all of us know what we need to do, then we know what to do. So that's one thing that I thought about that COVID, this kind of the drastic change the environment that helped us. And what I'm not saying that what helps us is not the COVID, but I'm saying that it's the understand better about our own selves actually helps. So that's, yeah. So that's, I'm just going to stop here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Dr. Nakamura. Sean, Scott, are there any other strategies that you think might be able to support neurodivergent individuals in pursuing leadership roles?
Yeah, so I loved what I heard, Dr. Nakamura, what you were saying, and where I think there's an opportunity is even think about on your own resume or prepping for an interview or what other kind of job hiring experience you might be going through, but to think about what are the skills that you have, and then be able to map those back to the job at hand. And you might have, someone who's neurodivergent might have some very unique skills. And going back to one of Scott's earlier comments, that maybe historically might have been kind of, I'll say, negatively conveyed. But if you are able to reframe them to align to the needs of that particular job, I think that would be really that in my mind is a really great strategy. And again, not unique to someone who's neurodivergent, but I think it's certainly a great exercise to go through. So if you are or if an individual has got the ability to stay kind of laser focused on a particular topic, and you might find that, well, gosh, on this particular job, as I look at the job description, that would be a pretty powerful skill to bring. I want to make sure that you bring that to life, whether it's on your resume or somehow weave that into the interview or other candidate assessment process. But I think it's just reframing what your traits are and mapping those back to the needs of the particular job.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. And I agree that this should apply, I think, to every type of individual. It's not really necessarily something just for neurodivergence. Okay. With that, we can head off to the last question, which is off to you, Sean. Unless, Scott, you wanted to add something.
No, I don't have anything to add. It was a great discussion.
Okay. So, Sean, this is a one-parter. You get off easy this time. What are the most impactful ways to empower neurodivergent individuals as they transition from education to employment and beyond, ensuring that they can thrive both personally and professionally?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I will caveat it with, I don't know that I can give you the most impactful ways. I can tell you ways that have been effective for us as a firm. But we are constantly in learning mode and looking for more and more effective ways to be impactful. But some of the things that we have implemented that I think have been successful is, one, we've established what we call business resource groups, or some firms call them employee resource groups. They are different communities. And one in particular that we have is for our neurodivergent colleagues, where they are able to come together and share their experiences, what they have, what works well for them, what doesn't work well for them. It's also an opportunity for them to kind of leverage knowledge that each other have gained. And frankly, as a firm, we also tap into those business resource groups as a way for us to learn about the needs of that particular community. Right, and think about what are let's say, the benefits that we might need to offer that might be appealing. And so we do that for a number of different communities. Neurodivergence just happens to be one of them. But that group, I judge its success based off of its growth, right? So we started at about 2.5, 3 years ago, and it's already now tripled in size. So they meet regularly, and it's very active dialogue and conversation. Another tool, I guess, that we use is different mentoring programs, right? So the ability for neurodivergent employees to identify leaders, some might be neurodivergent, some might be neurotypical, and help them develop kind of their skills over time. And gain experiences. So, at the very beginning, I talked about getting here, succeeding here, and leading here. And mentorship really helps us with both the succeeding here and leading here. So to be a leader anywhere, you need experiences that you can draw upon to be able to leverage in the current situation that you're facing into. And so through mentoring, it's a way of being able to download kind of the experiences that your mentor has had, and you can benefit from those as well. And so our mentoring programs have really taken off. And again, not unique to neurodivergence, but I think it's certainly a powerful tool for anyone, including people who are neurodivergent. And then the third one that I'll talk about is training. So it's, and I think I heard it talked about a little bit earlier, just making sure that the concept of neurodivergence is socialized and understood. And when we think about this training, oftentimes I think people, immediately go to, oh, well, we've got to train our neurodivergent colleagues. Sure, but we also need to train everyone in the firm, right? To have a better appreciation of what neurodivergence is and what it is not, and how to effectively work with neurodivergent colleagues and vice versa. And so we have, it's interesting, we put out a training, not mandatory, right? Completely voluntary. And right now we have about, I want to say between 8,000 and 9,000 people within the firm who have taken it just because they see the value of this type of training and how they might be able to more effectively work with their teams. And so it's been fantastic to be able to have that kind of communication, understanding, socialization around the concept of neurodiversity and within the firm. So those would be three that I would highlight. I'm sure there are others, but I know those are the three where we've started and have found some pretty great success.
Awesome. Those three are like great starting points. And I definitely love the mentoring part. I think even the component of like the reverse mentoring that some of the older mentors might receive from the younger individuals is extremely valuable. Dr. Nakamura or Scott, is there any other comments you'd like to add to this question?
Thank you. I echo about the mentoring, and that's something that also I notice in my studies as well. This is how effective it is, and really helps people to build confidence and also self-advocacy skills, because that they can ask what language to use and how to shift mindset. It's not just asking for favor, asking because that, so that I can be more successful in executing my tasks. And that's a really powerful approach to have the mentors. So thank you, Sean, bringing it up. I also mentioned that the reflecting back to what Scott said earlier in terms of the intersectionality, that for example, women is good at the very masking, so that requires them to do more work to be able to mask and execute the task that they're assigned to. So think about from the identity perspective, that we all have the multiple identities, right? And this, like from the perspective of the social identity of the leadership, then it's continuum, right? It's from the like lifespan perspective, from the really referred child age to continue, right? So then self-advocacy is something that in up to like high school age, because it's very protective if you need additional support for education, right? So then, but then once it's done and getting into the adulthood, all of a sudden, we also need to self-advocate. So that piece is, if that's really supported and providing and how to self-advocate, what the self-advocacy is, even start with that concept, and what kind of approaches that actually help me to advocate self in a way that it's not just asking favor. It's asking because I need this, I prefer to do this way, because so that we can better collaborate as a team in organization and be successful. So that piece, I just wondering, I also wanted to emphasize the importance of self-advocacy, but it's oftentimes is sort of formal education training or idea of even discussion is kind of sort of floating around the idea and it's good, but it's not really integrated in, for example, leadership development or some sort of formal training. And I just wanted to emphasize that maybe this is something that we can amplify the efforts. And I wanted to hear about how Sean and Scott are thinking about this too.
As I think about leadership and neurodiversity and neurodivergence, I think it just emphasizes there's no right way to do it, right? There's no single right way. There is no textbook, here's how to be a great leader. Everybody has to figure out the path that works for them, and everybody has to figure out the style of leadership that works for the individual members of their team. And so I think just staying clear-eyed on there is no perfect way to do this. The interest and the desire to try and to tweak and to be curious, that is what's going to make you a good leader. So there's, no matter what traits you have today, there is nothing that's going to prevent you from being a great leader, and there's nothing that individually is going to make you a great leader, right? Leadership is very situational. And it really is about finding the path that works for you, recognizing the differences in your team, figuring out the different styles that work for the different moments, for the different individuals.
I have to say, I'm so grateful Scott said that, because look, I'm an accountant by background, and for when it comes to accounting, there is a right way, right? And so I completely agree with what Scott just said. There is no one right way. There are multiple ways, and it's all situational depending on what you're facing into. So I was glad to hear that, because we certainly haven't figured out the right way just yet. And Miranda, I also wanted to circle back to a comment that you had made. It'll just take just a minute. You had talked about reverse mentoring, and I want to put a plug in for that for anyone out there who is contemplating becoming a mentor. Look, at anyone who knows me knows I'm the most self-centered person in the world, and if there's an opportunity to make something about me, I will. And same comes true when it comes to mentoring. So I started off. I have a mentoring relationship inside the firm where I'm at least started off, I was the mentor. And what I am finding is that we've been going through this relationship now for about 2-3 years. In this case, it's not someone who's neurodivergent. But what I've found is in every one of these conversations, I'm the one who's getting mentored. Like, I am learning more about how to operate. And so look, part of me, well, not part of me, I do hope that, my mentee is actually getting something out of it as well, but I certainly am. And so I really just a plug for any would-be mentors out there that you look at this as an opportunity, not for you just to help someone else grow, but for yourself to grow. So anyway,
Perhaps a more
Yeah.
positive way to spin what Sean just said there, because I've worked with Sean for a while and I would never call Sean self-centered, is it's a lesson you can learn from Ted Lasso. And one of my keys to success in life is be able to simplify anything. So a lesson that is very well played out in Ted Lasso is the value of being curious, right? Because what Sean is saying there, to put a more positive spin on it, is even as a mentor, even as somebody who's been there, be curious. There's always something you can learn, even from the people that you are mentoring, even from the people that you are supposedly serving. I work in an organization that arguably has neurodivergence pretty well figured out, right? Like, we're a pioneering nonprofit in the space. We are still learning. There are things that we would have thought were great programs 50 years ago that we would kind of not think are great programs today. We're continually learning, we're continually evolving. And so just adding that, because I think it's a more positive way to reframe, Sean, what you had just added to the conversation there.
Fair enough.
No, thank you to both of you. I do think that it's about keeping the curiosity. I love Ted Lasso, by the way, so great comment there. But I think it is about that. You learn something from every experience, even if you think you won't. There's always something to take away from it. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you for answering our questions. We do have 4 minutes for Q&A. I know that Sean and Scott, you guys have done an amazing job of answering a few of these questions already. But there is one that is unanswered, so I'm going to read it out and anyone feel free to respond to it. Is there anything we need to consider when utilizing self-assessments for neurodivergent employees for team building or coaching?
Look, I'll take a crack at it. I think just like Scott was saying earlier, there's probably no one right way to do anything. There's probably also no one right way to do a self-assessment. And so you got to take all these assessments with a little bit of a grain of salt, right? Like they give you some information, but that's probably just a jumping off point to have a deeper conversation with an individual to better assess kind of what the capabilities and needs are of that particular individual.
I want to echo everything Sean said. Maybe taking a negative spin to the question, if there's an area where I think there are landmines where people need to be careful with creating assessments, it's in the framing of questions. I would be very thoughtful about how questions are worded to make sure that they are straightforward. I would avoid multi-part questions. I would try to break questions down to their simpler components and separate them. I would also try to make sure questions are focused and not overly open-ended. I might even steer clear of the hypothetical and look for somebody to give fact-based examples. But even with those tips in mind, I go back to what Sean said, which is it is one element of the conversation. Don't overly rely on the response to the assessment. Look at it as a good starting point where to jump in. But that's some thoughts on issues with an assessment.
Thank you so much for the insights. And I really like that yin and yang where you and Sean are offering the positive and maybe not so positive spins on it. And thank you as well, Dr. Nakamura. This has been extremely interesting. I will now be handing it off to Şenay, Dr. Şenay, as we don't have any further questions.
Thank you so much. This was such an eye-opening conversation, and as many things in life, this is a journey, and there is always more we can learn, and there is always better we can do. I think there is so much in this that which will make us think and which will make us improve our community and ourselves and learn from others. And as we have talked, this is not just for neurodivergence, given that all of us are neurodivergent, as Scott mentioned very nicely, and Sean and Dr. Nakamura indicated. All of us will learn something from this and become a better community, better society, more innovative, inclusive workplace in many facets of the society. This will show up. I would really like to thank all the panelists. This was an amazing discussion. Thank you for your time. Miranda, you were an amazing moderator, and thank you for the participants. Your questions were very interesting, and we learned all together from this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.